Anyway, hello everyone. My name is Nathan Lee, just Nathan, and I'm a developer at the Interledger Foundation, and I've been working with Interledger and Interledger-related products and technologies since about 2018. I was a former employee of Coil, rest in peace, and yeah, we'll just leave it at that. Today I'll be giving a high-level overview of how GNAP is used to authorize payments in open payments and by extension Rafiki. So let's dive right in. So, basic question to answer. What is GNAP? What is GNAP? Now, if you're someone like me, answering the question of what is GNAP is an opportunity for an interesting adventure. With just a little imagination, GNAP could stand for anything. Try this. Geese never ask permission. Anyone ever see a Canada goose before? If you have, you know those birds can get real pushy. How about this one? Guys need a psychologist? I think it's just good for us to take care of our mental health. That's all. Okay, just one more before we get into it. All right. Giant. Nasty. Where's this going, Nathan? Alien. Probe. The possibilities are endless, folks. Okay, let's get into it for real now. So, no more jokes. Definitely no more jokes. Anyway, to get right into it, GNAP stands for Grant Negotiation and Authorization Protocol. It's a successor to OAuth 2, which you may have encountered when, say, signing up for a social media site, and it gives you the option to sign up with, say, your email or your Google account. Now, GNAP is similar in that it is a process for a client to be granted access to specific resources on a resource server. So, why use GNAP instead of OAuth 2? The primary reason for this is that GNAP improves on OAuth 2 in ways that make it more versatile than its predecessor. It is this versatility that made it a good fit when designing open payments. And so to espouse on the core features of GNAP's versatility, they are: grant authorization process uses the same flow in every context. GNAP does not assume the user has a browser. It minimizes the amount of information passed through the front channel, uses polymorphic JSON for requests, uses a JSON web key for client identification, and discovery and registration are not required before starting the GNAP flow. So in GNAP, the roles are also not too dissimilar from OAuth, but first up is the client, which is the entity requesting access to one or more resources. To map this to the Rafiki testnet you also earlier today, that would be, say, Rafiki Boutique or some other online storefront that wants to charge a vault address, some amount. Next up is the resource owner. Should be pretty self-explanatory. That is the owner of the resource, which in this case is a wallet, an online wallet. Next up is the resource server, which is the server on which the resource owner holds the resource in question. So, yeah, is a resource still going to mean anything after this? We'll see. So anyway, but that would be like Rafiki Money in the Rafiki testnet analogy, or otherwise some other online wallet host. Next up is the authorization server that delegates access to resources on the resource server. And finally, the identity provider is the party that determines that the person at the keyboard is indeed the owner of the resource in question. We still good? Resource still means something? It's not, doesn't lost all meaning yet? Good? Good? Good in the front? Good in the back? Cool. So because GNAP has streamlined the process for acquiring a grant, the process can be generalized into 3 steps. First is the grant request, which initiates the process, identifies the client to the authorization server, and outlines the scope of access for the grant. Next up is the interaction which if an authorization server deems it necessary, then it's the step where the resource owner indicates to the auth server that they do or perhaps do not wish to allow the client access to the requested resources. On completion, the authorization server signals that it is done with interaction to the client, which means we can then move on to grant continuation, which is where the client indicates to the authorization server that it is ready to advance the grant process. If all conditions are met, such as a pending interaction, then the authorization server will issue an access token to the client and then end the flow. So I think this slide will probably be the main takeaway because there's a lot to GNAP, but knowing basically just that it's down to these 3 steps will help make it a lot easier as you're diving deeper into learning about it. So what does GNAP enable in open payments? In open payments, GNAP is used to authorize the creation and accessing of quotes, incoming payments, and outgoing payments. So remember how I mentioned that interaction may or may not be necessary? So if a client is requesting access to perform actions on quotes or incoming payments, then interaction would not be necessary, but it is for outgoing payments. When a client makes any of these requests, it uses the access token it received during the GNAP flow to authorize the request, which the research server then takes and performs what is called token introspection on it by making a call to the authorization server that issued it to see if it's valid. So don't worry about the text. It's probably very small to read. We'll get more granular in a second, and it'll be much bigger. Don't worry. But here's an example of a grant request for an open payments resource, which in this case is an outgoing payment. Again, this is the request that initializes the GNAP flow and outlines the scope of access and how interaction should be handled if necessary. So to go into the 3 fields that are kind of like at the top level of this object, first up is the client. This is the wallet address of the recipient of the outgoing payment. But this URL not only refers to the wallet address, but the authorization server would also use it to retrieve the public JSON web key to use to identify that wallet address in subsequent GNAP requests. Next up is the access token, or the access token field, I should say, which outlines what access the client wants. Note the access array where currently only has 1 item, which is the type of resource, the outgoing payment, and the actions that the client would like to be able to make on the outgoing payment, create, read, and list, and also importantly, the limits on the grant. So this is kind of an example where GNAP is more useful than OAuth, because to outline sort of like you can do this, but in OAuth it'd get kind of tricky, but in GNAP we can just delineate them in a way that fits us. See, for a payment, we can describe how much we want to debit the wallet address by and what currency we should use. Finally, there's the interact field, which indicates to the auth server how it can signal to the client when interaction starts and ends. Note the start and finish fields, very self-explanatory, I believe. Now, as a visual aid, here's a diagram that shows how GNAP and open payments fit inside of Rafiki. The software, not the mandrill from The Lion King. Don't think about how anything fits inside it. That would be weird. Anyway, so note how Rafiki implements both the resource server and the auth server. And I'm just going to walk you through how a GNAP flow would look on this diagram, and each relevant step is going to be kind of highlighted in a reddish orange or orangish red, whatever helps you sleep at night. Anyway, to perform the GNAP flow, the client makes a grant request to the auth server, then redirects the user to an interactive page on the identity provider. So the identity provider then records the result of the interaction and sends it to the auth server. And then the auth server signals to the client that interaction is complete. Then the client, having been signaled that interaction is over, performs a grant continuation request with the auth server, and then having been issued an access token afterwards, starts making resource requests to the resource server, and when those come into the resource server, it performs token introspection on the auth server, and then if that comes back as valid, then it completes the resource request. So in addition to using an access token to authorize open payments requests to a resource server, the client may also take other actions to manage that token. When a token is first issued, it is valid for 10 minutes, but even if the token is expired, the client may make a request to the authorization server to rotate that token out for a new unexpired token. In addition, it may make a request to the auth server to revoke an access token if they want to honor a resource owner's intention to remove their ability to do that. Now, when a client is making a request to an authorization server as part of a grant request or for token management, it is expected to provide what are called HTTP signatures in the request headers. These help the authorization server verify the client's identity across multiple requests by using the JSON web key it provided in the initial grant request to verify the signature. Because GNAP has such versatility, Open Payments has taken some license on how it implements specific things in GNAP. For instance, it only supports redirect-based interaction, and for resources such as wallet addresses or incoming payments, if an unauthenticated request is made to those resources, then the response will include the address of the authorization server a client should use to gain more privileged access to those resources. So that should cover the basics of using GNAP with Open Payments. There's 100% more to this than what I was able to cover, but there's not a lot of time. But I encourage you to peruse the documentation and guides that the ILF has so graciously provided for you all. But speaking from experience, diving into this stuff might be more of a transformational experience than you might expect. You might notice something's changing in your life. You're spending a long time reading specs, poring over and dissecting implementation code. Your friends, family, loved ones, coworkers calling you weird names like Nathan. I might be projecting a little on that last one, but just be careful, okay? Anyway, if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask me and we can figure out this beast together. Also, please take some time to play around with GNAP and the Rafiki authorization server, and also be around during the hackathon as well if you want to find an easy place to find me. But for now, I hope you have a decent understanding of how to use the giant nasty alien probe in Rafiki. Sorry, what talk was I giving again? Oh, yeah, the grant negotiation and authorization protocol in Rafiki. Thank you.